They put me in prison. So what? Good. I'll be able to read some books. Good. I'll be able to talk to my comrades. Good. I'll be able to understand prison life and what the working class, thinks and feels. It's a school, right? They haven't killed you, so you're stronger. We're humans. We're not things, right? It's not like you chip away at a block. Humans aren't like that. They regenerate themselves. They're paradoxical. Bad things happen and you grow through it. And everyone knows that. The big plus point, as you might say, in a reductive sense, about going to prison is you basically create an army of revolutionaries.
If you don't know Roger Hallam's name, you definitely know the organisations that he's had a hand in building. Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil. And it's tempting to pigeonhole him as a ranting climate person, just running around trying to sound the alarm on the catastrophes of global heating. But that would be a caricature. And I think it really misses his real role on the British left. At heart, he's a strategist, just the kind who's more likely to be found wearing prison sweatshirts than a single-breasted suit. Fresh from a prison sentence for participating in a Zoom call, Roger Hallam joins us on Downstream to talk about whether your party could spark a global revolution, the centrality of good vibes to good strategy, and the importance of Zoom calls in building a mass movement. I hope you enjoy the interview. Oh, and before we get cracking, you might not know, but we have a new newsletter. So if you want a glimpse behind the scenes, some extra questions, sign up at novara.media/downstream newsletter. There will be one this week for this interview, in which I ask Roger Hallam who he most identifies with from the Tolkien universe, what he watches on Netflix, and what his favourite Bible passage is. Roger Hallam, welcome to Downstream.
Hello.
Better or worse than being in prison, being in the studio?
Well, at this moment in time, I'm a bit nervous about it. And I wasn't that nervous in prison because prison is just one day after another. But it's all fine, basically.
I mean, look, working for Novara is like one day after another as well. So
yeah.
Just like prison.
Just like prison, yeah.
Just like prison.
That's one of my main points, really.
I wanted to talk about something that you wrote in August of this year, which was called Grasping the Enormity of the Moment. And it was kind of addressed to your party and an intervention into party formation, I think it's fair to say. And one of the things you wrote was this: "Let me make a big claim. I think the Corbyn and Sultana announcement on creating a new movement/party is the biggest moment of our lifetimes. I need to be more clear. I think it can lead to a global political revolution." At this point in mid-November, do you still feel the same way?
No. I mean, obviously not, but moments come and go. And I was writing in that particular moment when everyone was very excited by the prospect of 800,000, well, by the reality of 800,000 people expressing an interest in your party. And from a more technical point of view, it happening within a month. So for me, as you know, when I wrote the book, that creates a massive amount of momentum. And momentum is everything when it comes to radical politics. And so I was writing at that moment where there was a big opening in the social space, as you might say. And I don't think I was saying anything particularly controversial. Yeah.
But I suppose when you're talking about it and grasping the enormity of the moment, you're sort of saying, well, if at this point in August they take advantage of the momentum, 600,000 signups could be 100,000, 200,000 members. Where they are right now in terms of membership is 50,000. In terms of your experience as an organiser, do you look at 50,000 and you go, not worth bothering with? Or do you go, 50,000, you can do something with this? It might not be a mass party with mass character, but you can do something.
Yes, obviously you can do something, but there's a big difference between what I would call linear moments, which is what we've got now again, and non-linear moments. Non-linear moments are where basically anything becomes possible, and they're very rare. But no doubt they'll become increasingly common, over the next 10 years. So it's not like, that's it, we're done for. It's more like, okay, so you lost that one, and what we need to learn is why we lost that one and how we're going to make the next one work. And But yeah, coming back to your party, obviously it's got potentiality, and but it's not going to get to 2 million members in the next 6 months, obviously.
What would you do with 50,000 members, though?
What I would do with 50,000 members is the same as I suggest in the book, which is to have a bunch of Zoom calls with 2,000-3,000 people on them. Because Zoom, incidentally, or on, not to promote the company, but but online calls are a massive new instrument for mobilization, because it's one click away. And what we've found over the last 30, 40 years is the culture of people coming to public meetings has become more and more restricted to people that are quite self-entitled, self-empowered, middle class, etc., or part of an older political generation who used to go to political meetings. So those times, traditionally political meetings were a big deal, particularly 100 years ago, 10,000 people would show up. But nowadays, that's not really the case. And if you want to, this is the key point, if you want to get a plurality of people involved in a movement, then going online is paradoxically, in a way, a good way to do it. Because in some ways, 10, 20 years ago, people were saying, well, you have something online, you exclude people because people haven't got the digital knowledge or capacities and what have you. But I think now it's the other way around, which is more people will come online. So that's the first point, and that's the first error that's being made, is to just have public meetings where you basically end up talking to the choir. So once you've got the Zoom calls, sorry, I'm going to go into the details.
No, go for it, because I actually really want to ask about this, because one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is the way in which you can create and nurture and nourish bonds of solidarity, mutual obligation, and sort of strengthen people's collective muscles, which have been atrophied by screens and loneliness, the amount of time we spend indoors. I think the average adult in the UK spends about 90% of their time indoors. We're very cut off from each other.
Yeah.
And I suppose I'm interested in what you're saying about Zoom calls, because on the one hand, you go, okay, you can get 2,000 people on a call. But on the other, those 2,000 people aren't interacting with one another. They're not forming new political relationships with one another.
Yeah, so you have to bear with me because there's more to it than the Zoom call, right? So, but the broader point here is when you're developing a strategy, you have to do some things which are suboptimal in order to get to a better place. And that's the point of the Zoom call. So the point of the Zoom call is to get enough people, a lot of people, into one space, which is in itself inspiring. If you get 100, 200, 1,000 people on a Zoom call, and now you can get 10,000 people on a Zoom call. So for me, this is a massive game changer. And incidentally, you can also have real-time translation, and we'll come on to this, later on potentially. But you've got the people there. You've got, Jeremy and Zarah do the speech. You've got breakout groups. Great breakout groups, as is my is my thing. Is it's when you get 6 people together that you start creating empowerment, because everyone gets time to speak. And the research I did at King's College years ago was all centered around the microdynamics of empowerment. If you have a big meeting, no one speaks, people are disempowered. If you have small groups and people engage in the act of speech, they find themselves getting empowered, right? It's a thing that comes upon you, as you might say. So this is a big design point, which has massive implications. And this is how we built all the social movements, that we've been involved with, the people, XR and JSO and the ones around Europe. They're all based upon this principle that people like to be in small groups. So where are we up to? So there's a line. The details count, right? That's, it might sound a bit technical, but the details count. So once people have been on that Zoom call, they're empowered enough to go onto another Zoom call. Why do they go onto another Zoom call? Because you need to get all the people in, say, Bolton onto a Zoom call about Bolton, right? Again, if you had a meeting in the centre of Bolton, then lots of people who sort of see themselves as marginal to the political space generally won't turn up. because they're alienated from that form. And also, a lot of people don't have the money to go, and a lot of people, working class culture is very localized. People won't go into the centre of town. We've got lots of experience of this. If you have an assembly in the centre of town, it's a middle class space. If you want working class people to turn up, as a general right, I'm generalising, obviously, you have to have the assembly in a neighbourhood. It needs to be within 10, 15 minutes walk. Otherwise, you won't get the diversity of people in the space, just as a matter of practice. So the second Zoom call basically consolidates that a critical mass of diverse people within Bolton, and then, because all those people are in Bolton, then you have a pathway to the outdoors, right? Which is, okay, we're going to split Bolton into 10 areas, and we're all going to go door knocking, and we're going to, if you're in Northwest Bolton or whatever it's called, then we meet at the St. George's pub next Wednesday at 7 o'clock.
So like Soviet councils at the pub?
There's variations on the theme, right? But the optimal model is you go straight from the Zoom call to doing stuff, because this is the second principle, is people find solidarity through activity, through moving the body, through doing things together, through the adrenaline rush, as you might say, of knocking on doors. If you knock on doors, if you're at all human, you're always like, oh my God, the first 5 minutes is like death. And then, after about half an hour, you start cheering up. And at the end of it, you're going, wow, that was great.
Was that your experience? Because previously, when you talked to my colleague Aaron, we talked about your experience of being politicised on the climate, but not so much about what it was like for you to become politically active. So when you were a baby door knocker, what was that like for you? Like the first time you're trying to do this kind of work?
Well, I've got a slightly embarrassing history. That I actually went door knocking for 20 years because I was a farmer, and I used to sell my produce, via direct delivery for 20 years. And I had 20,000 customers, and I built all that up through door knocking. So I've already, during those 20 years, I talked to just about every social group in the UK. But I never really got used to it, in the sense that I'm actually quite shy. I drag myself into things like this because, the world's fucked and something needs to happen. So when I'm knocking on the doors, initially, I'm always thinking I'm a twat for the first 5 minutes. But then, as I said, once I get into it, and that was the same thing that happened for a good 20 years. So when I came into politics again, as you might say, then I brought that knowledge with me. And before I was a farmer, I was a community organizer for 10 years, and then I was in the peace movement from being 14 to 20. So I've done a lot of this work for decades, and then you get these hunches about what works and what doesn't work. So the upshot of it is once you can get a critical mass of people door knocking, the beauty of door knocking, there's a big disadvantages of door knocking. But for me, the big advantage of door knocking is about creating new network connections. You're knocking on some, wherever you live, in Hackney or wherever it is, right?
Please, Tottenham. How dare you?
I do apologise. Right. In Tottenham, you think, oh, I know Tottenham. You know how people speak about that? Oh, I've lived in Tottenham for 20 years. There's basically all you're thinking about is your network. And your network is 1% of Tottenham at best, right? And so 99% of Tottenham you never talk to. Well, if you go door knocking, if you've got experience of door knocking, particularly in London, you door knock along streets in London, and you're hitting about 6 or 7 different cultural groups in an hour. And each of those cultural groups has got 100 networks. And one of those networks is going to come on your side. And so from a mobilization point of view, you're basically creating new nodes of expansion, rather than what usually happens on the left, and generally in radical politics, as you know, is you basically regurgitate the same node and network.
I want to think about how this relates to political parties. And I'm not just talking about electoral parties. There's obviously different kinds of party form. Yeah. I don't know if many viewers will be familiar with this, but a sort of voguish thing going on at the moment is that people are discovering the Belgian Workers' Party at the minute. So that's the sort of, that's the new, slightly hipster esoteric things that everyone's getting into, the Belgian Workers' Party and their sort of theory of cadre building and so on and so forth. And one of the things that Peter Mertens, who is a very senior figure in the Belgian Workers' Party, says is that what we try and get people to do is these listening exercises. So when someone, wants to join the Belgian Workers' Party, what do we tell them to do? We tell them to get out, knock on doors, and just talk to people in their local community about the things that they want. And I can see how that's got some kind of overlap with what you're saying. But in terms of how you develop a party platform, I mean, even in Tottenham, you're going to hear a lot of people talking about immigration. We want less immigration. There's too much pressure on housing. There's too much pressure on public services. How do you sort of thread that needle of being like, okay, we actually want to build power amongst the class, to sort of put it in a Marxist term. We also want to create a political project which is of the class and appealing to the class. And also we want to maintain our principles, which means not caving to anti-immigration sentiment or whatever else it is. How do you do that? Maintaining the integrity of your principles whilst also saying this process of listening and sort of tapping into the wisdom that's in your community, that's the central thing you do.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think we need to go back a little bit to the listening thing, if that's all right, because I think it's very easy to just think that's a little technicality. It's not. It's central to the whole meta strategy of empowerment, right? And what's happening in Belgium with that strategy is extremely exciting, particularly for myself, because that's what I've been saying for the last 10 years. You know, since I was at King's College, I don't know if you know, but at King's College, I was studying the psychology of mobilization, otherwise known as how to cause trouble, right? And I spent all my time not at King's College. I spent all my time with campaigns. So I go to a campaign, and I was a little bit like stroppy in those days. I sort of go like, oh, you've got to follow me.
Oh, you've really changed.
Yeah,
Roger.
well, I was a little bit overly stroppy, let's put it like that. But but I was going to campaigns and I had a theory and then I wanted to see whether it worked. For the first 2 years, I had this traditional 19th century idea, which is common on the left and the right, that you go with a proposition, people cognitively and rationally assess it, and then they decide to act. And it's rubbish, right? Which doesn't mean you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is a theme I want to sort of communicate in this interview. It's not like when I criticize something, I'm not saying you destroy it, it has no place. So like rationality has a place, obviously, because we make decisions on the basis of pros and cons, don't we? But there's this fundamental realization, which is potentially the biggest discovery of social science, I would say, in the last 50 years. It sounds a little bit dramatic, but I think it is, which is the human is not rational, right? It's not primarily rational. And, we've just got this big inheritance, with neoliberalism and sort of vulgar Marxism, it's all about interest and all this sort of stuff. That's not how it works. How it works is people feel empowered through the participation of being attended to, being recognised. What I would call like love, right? Which is a bit of a controversial word, but that's what I think the essence of it is. Like you're born, you get love, you go through your life, you want to love, and when you die, someone has to love you. This is what we need. So it's you could use another word like connectivity, but it's a bit of a horrible word.
No, but
you see what
I'm
I mean?
with you.
So what people respond to is, it doesn't really matter what someone's saying. It does matter to a certain extent, obviously, but what the fundamental thing is someone attending to you. And of course, this is the big dynamic in fascism, is someone saying, you're great, I'm going to pursue your interests, follow me.
I'm going to lift you up. I'm going to lift you up
all
from
this,
the dirt.
Yes, all this like emotionality, right? And what the left does is we want, 2 pence on tax. You've heard this criticism of left, it's been going on for 200 years, right? Which is the left doesn't get it. The French Revolution, it was all like super rational. Why didn't people want it? Because Catholicism was just more sexy. It was like gay, you had the ritual, it had the costumes, it had the, it had the big metaphysics, right? And what did the left do? Left had, well, you won't need to work so long, which was obviously important, but
also I'd argue that there are certain concepts We were actually talking about this before you came in, because there's this amazing album by a singer called Rosalia, and it makes me want to be Catholic. Even though I'm Muslim, I'm like, oh God, I'm thinking of converting for aesthetic reasons. And one of the things that I think that the left has really lost is that we've got the language of accountability, but not the language of forgiveness. And there is something that we've been shaped by a particular kind of secularism and also a particular logic of neoliberalism that makes other people really disposable. So when you're talking about love, I'd also say we're talking about acceptance of people, not treating people as disposable. You can't just throw them away. And you're also talking about the importance of forgiveness. That we take you as you are.
We've got about 3 themes going, all of which are really important. So let me just, I'm just trying to present something that's coherent, you see what I mean? So let's just stick with what motivates people for the moment, right? So we've got this general idea that a recognition stroke love is what basically gets people out of bed in the morning, right? So that gets concretized in the act of listening. So what I discovered, as I've just said a minute ago, is, or rediscovered, obviously, right? Because people, I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants, just for the record, right? I'm not really saying anything original. Is that once you split people into small groups, the duty of small groups is more people can speak. It's just physics, right? You've got a certain amount of time, and you've got a smaller number of people. And when people start talking, then they get happy. They cheer up, and then they talk more. Well, if they don't talk at all, they get more and more miserable, right? It's very deterministic, and this is something I use over and over again. So that's how, when we start designing Extinction Rebellion, what have you, for me, like, this was a central mechanism. As you may know, we did 1,000 public meetings, but not in a single public meeting did we do a Q&A, right? Because Q&As are death, for a bunch of reasons I can go into. What we always did is split people up into groups, and then everyone gets excited. And then everyone signs up to do stuff, because so you have the speech, you have the breakout groups, and then you have 3 pathways to action. And that's the basic form of effective mobilization. So I've forgotten where we're up to now.
The thing is, we've been going like this a lot.
So the Marxist thing in Belgium. So what's exciting to me is people in the Marxist space have made a transition from realizing the form of mobilization is not an act of faith stroke ideology. You don't have to have a branch voting like a system to be a Marxist. Marxism is about taking control of the means of production, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't tell you whether you should have a Q&A or a small group. You see what I mean? Marx didn't write a book on mobilization. So we're free as Marxists, generally speaking on the left. We don't have to, just do what they did in the 1880s. We are free to actually look at what social science has said over the last 50 years and go, actually, this is better. And that's what's exciting about what's happening in Belgium. And this then comes onto the doorstep, right? And I've been saying this, I had a bit of an argument with Owen Jones about this,
Friend of the show, Owen Jones.
Yeah, obviously a nice one as far as I was concerned. But, I'm sure you won't like me saying this, but anyway, what Owen was saying, but Owen's just an example of a culture on the left of going, what we need to do is go to Cornwall and door knock and mobilise people, right? I remember him saying that. And the people on the left do this all the time. And I'm sort of pulling my hair out because I'm saying, like, that doesn't tell you anything. That tells you either it's going to be a complete disaster or it's going to be amazing. You're not actually focusing on what's important, which is what they've done in Belgium. What they've discovered is when you knock on a door, you should have the 20-80 rule, which is you speak 20% of the time, they speak 80% of the time. So we've just done this in Brixton, dare I say. I've just spent 10 weeks knocking on doors in Brixton. You knock on a door and you say, hi, I'm from a community group. Would you like to, can I ask you 1 or 2 questions? What are the few things that you like in Brixton? What's 1 or 2 things that aren't so good? And they're often away, obviously, particularly on the negative stuff, because there's sorts of, things that aren't that great, right? And then you're saying, okay, so that's really great. What we'd like to do is to invite you to this community meetup so that then you can speak more about it. And the reason they're going to turn up or turn up more often is because they've engaged in the act of speech. The act of speech is a non-rational way in which they've connected with you, which isn't to say, by the way, this is just an instrumentalist sort of orientation. You're doing it obviously because it's good in itself and you're a left-wing person and you believe in humanity, right? So it's good to listen to people as an end in itself. And at the same time, you're going to get, for the sake of argument, 100% more people actually turning up to the assembly because they've been allowed to speak. And if people have been door knocking and have done this, you will notice that people get very emotional. The more marginalised people are, the more working class people are, whatever words you want to use, it's extremely emotional for people to be listened to because no one fucking listens to these people, ever. They're told what to do. And this is why we're in such a mess, because you knock on the door and they go, for the first 10 seconds, as you may know, they go, oh, no, I don't want to do that. Oh, I've heard all this. It's like you have to get in there. No. You tell me what's going on. What's going on? What's going on in this estate? And this might sound a small thing, but it's massive from the mathematics point of view, right?
But I guess I do want to come back to this thing about forgiveness and acceptance, because I think it's important when you're thinking about the political culture on the left and what it's like sometimes in left-wing spaces. So one of our encounters that we had was at TWT a few years ago, and you said the funniest shit on the planet. I asked, what was wrong with the left? And you said, you're all a bunch of fucking cunts. And then the room just sort of set about trying to prove you right. Everyone got very upset by the language that you used. It's not really a surprise to me. I live with an Australian. I hear that word a lot. And the thing which really struck me about this whole thing, I mean, one, it really coalesced some things that I'd already been thinking about the sort of dead end of liberal identity politics. But the other was how primed we are to throw each other away. Yeah. And so we're looking for someone to say something that makes us feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is sort of elevated to the point of harm or oppression, and then a mechanism of condemnation and ostracism sort of kicks in. And so what you're talking about, which is I'm trying to create various environments and pathways for working class people to speak for themselves and to articulate their reality as they see it within a left-wing culture, which is hyperfixated in some ways. I think it's changing a bit, but still hyperfixated on language and people using the right terminology and thinking the right thing and framing things in the right way. How do you shift that as a culture?
Well, yeah, okay. Well, so we're coming on to a new topic, right?
Yeah.
So let me tell you a little story, right, which sort of illustrates the problem. So I was... Before Extinction Rebellion, I found myself in various climate groups. Climate groups, as everyone knows, are primarily white middle class and sometimes very middle class, right? And but their ideology, as they present it, is we're on the side of the oppressed. We want to support the marginalised, blah, 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 blah,
We're
blah.
the
right?
received pronunciation voice of the global south.
Yeah, well, it's a thing, right? We know, particularly in London, but, in many of the in cities. So then this guy comes along. He's working class within about 3 seconds, right? Because class is the biggest issue, it's the biggest cultural divide, as far as I'm concerned, in the UK. So he sits down and you know what he's going to do, right? He's going to use working class language. So he said, cunt. Right? Because loads of working class people, in case people don't know, use the word cunt, right, all the time. I've just been in prison for a year. It's like cunt, fuck, cunt, fuck. It's like, okay, so it's just another day, right? That's how, you need to get out more if you don't realise that's a major word for 20% of the population, right? And so you know what happens? Immediately he says that word. A bloke obviously goes, oh, well, that's, oppressive, da. He's fucked, right? Because he's humiliated in front of other people. There's zero chance that guy's coming back. He never comes back. And this is like a major problem, which links with the whole mobilisation, but it's a major problem of not understanding the social structure of the UK because you don't get out of the house and actually talk to people. And in terms of a mobilisation orientation, like, unless you can see your engagement with other people as a process rather than a one-off confrontation, then you don't get into the logic of actually listening. You get into the logic of condemning. Because, let's say for the sake of argument, is problematic, right? That's not the issue. The issue is that this guy needs to be listened to, partially as a matter of, respect, which, if that's not the basis of socialism, what is? And then through that communication and through developing that connections, then maybe once you've built up some trust, then maybe you want to have some, respectful discussion about language.
But is it also a little bit about, because I find myself doing this, right? I find myself with my little middle class habits. And one is we itch to correct people. We itch to correct their language. So it's not just about listening to someone and being like, okay, well, you're a working class person, because there's a sort of condescension in that, isn't there? Like, oh, you poor dear, you don't know any better. There's also something about having a mirror to yourself and understanding where these urges come from, the ways in which you demonstrate your mastery or sort of superiority around the people around you.
Yeah, well, I think the left has a major problem with its theory of the human, right? Because its theory of the human is rooted in 19th century social Darwinism, right? There's a social Darwinism on the right, as we all know. But there's a social Darwinism on the left, which is people are things and some of them are bad and it's us versus them. And so you have to smash them, right? It's Newtonianism. I've written a lot about this. And, it all sounds a bit intellectual, but it's absolutely critical to understand why we're not succeeding, which is this sort of complex of toxicities in left culture, which is the tragedy of it is the left, because it's become so insular, it's got cut off from other social developments. And this is where,
like what?
Like the notion of nonviolent communication, for instance. So in the sort of hippie green climate democracy world, there's a very different culture, which is broadly around nonviolent communication. And there's criticism of nonviolent communication as a mode of operation, right?
What is it? Like, I've never heard of it.
Nonviolent communication, the fundamental of nonviolent communication says you criticise actions, not people. So you don't say, Ash, you're bad because you just said that. You say, Ash, when you say that, it's a problem because of this. So you're not bashing the person's ego. I mean, it's obvious, right? You just don't do that sort of thing if you're trying to develop a relationship. I mean, if you're just trying to smash someone, it doesn't matter, right? But assuming you're trying to build a movement, you say it's a halfway house, right? And that's like standard culture. And this is one of the reasons why that space has been able to create mass movements in the way the left hasn't. And I'm not, for the record, at all, saying the left is all bad and the climate green space is all good. Far from it, right? The left has very valid criticisms of green culture because of the class issue, for instance, right? So again, this is not about being defensive or attacking. What it's about is analysing so we can get better. And the beauty of what's happening at the moment is the repression of the state is forcing these spaces to actually start coming together, because if we don't come together, we're done for the obvious reasons. But and what's coming out of that, hopefully, is a lot of mutual learning, where each space is bringing its strengths and having its challenges, having its weaknesses challenged. And this is one of the major issues. I
mean, okay, I want to follow this little tendril, which is about the brutal repression of the state. So something that you've experienced, something that many GSO activists have experienced, something that many Palestine Action and Defend Our Juries activists have experienced is prison time now. Yeah. Sentences are getting harsher. The admissible defences to actions are being clamped down on. So there's restrictions on being able to make a greater harm defence or a human rights defence. I'm asking you not from a moral perspective, but a strategic one. Has getting loads of people into the prison system had a political utility, in your view? Or is it something which actually takes a load of really dedicated activists, knocks them out of commission. Lots of time and manpower is taken up with prison support work, and all these people could have been doing something else.
Well, that's something else which needs to be said about the left. Is the left is very binary, right? And this comes from sort of 19th century debating culture. It's like, is it this or is it that, right? And what we've got to get into is complex dynamics. Right? That's how reality works. It's always complex and it's always dynamic. So we need to think about a multiple range of effects all happening at the same time, and we need to think about how those effects interrelate with each other over time, right? How they dynamically. It's not like something just happens, right? It always obviously happens in space. And again, this sounds like, what's this about? This is like critical to smart strategy. So when we're strategizing like in JSO, the culture isn't like, will this be good or bad? The strategic culture is, to what extent is it bad? And to what extent is it good?
Okay, so to what extent is it bad and to what extent is it good that loads of activists are doing like quite significant prison time?
Yeah. So it's bad in inverted commas, because for the reasons you've said, which is it can be traumatizing, it takes people out of commission, as it were. You need a support system, particularly if the major strategists are in prison. The space loses focus. Those are the downsides, and the positive sides, and arguably the most important side, is through the experience of prison, people become more strategically and spiritually mature, as I would put it. And this is a very new experience for the left. Because for me, like what happened on the left was decimated in 1989. And for 30 years, we haven't really had a left, classically speaking. What we've had, as you wrote in your book, is liberal identity politics. That has nothing to do with the classical left, as hopefully lots of people know. The classical left is about mass formations going up against mass power. Right, and also the solidarity dynamics that come out of the experience of repression. So it's not a vulnerability culture in the sense of, oh, I've gone to prison. My culture expects me to sort of have a major breakdown. I need all this support. The classical left orientation and the classical resistance orientation is always, they put me in fucking prison. So what? You know what I mean? So what? Good, I'll be able to read some books. Good, I'll be able to talk to my comrades. Good, I'll be able to understand prison life and what the working class, thinks and feels. It's a school, right? And then you come out and you're even stronger from a Nietzschean point of view. You see what I mean? They haven't killed you, so you're stronger. So you see this observationally all the time over the last 200 years. But during the last 30 years, we've had this exceptionalism about this neoliberal notion of the self, which is, it's terrible things are happening. And obviously, right, I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Terrible things happen. I've been criticised for this, or at least when the left was in its supremacist phase, before Corbyn got done in. The left was every time I said something like this on social media, left would be, you're some white supremacist because you don't understand that the marginalised, can't go to prison. It's like, no, it's like the marginalised always go to prison, always have, and always will.
Yeah, I remember. I think I had my phase of thinking that, and then I just remembered that that's not the history of black and brown communism at all.
Well, it's historic. To be blunt, it's historically illiterate, but it's also psychologically literate, with all due respect, right? Because it's just not what happens. We've had this post-traumatic stress sort of culture, which is real, and it's good that it's become a thing for obvious reasons, right? Because terrible things happen to people and they feel terrible about it afterwards. No questioning about it. But for the sake of argument, it's around 20% of people that have that experience. And if you look at literature, for the sake of argument, it's around 60, 70% of people experience post-traumatic growth. In other words, they take what is bad happening to them and they transform that, right? Because we're humans, we're not things, right? It's not like you chip away at a block. Humans aren't like that. They regenerate themselves. They're paradoxical. Bad things happen and you grow through it. And everyone knows that. How do you grow, become a better person, more mature? Because shit happens, right? And you decide, all right, that shit happens. I've learned from that. I'm going to go forward. So there's nothing like unusual. It's just about what I'm saying. And so the big plus point, as you might say, in a reductive sense, about going to prison is you basically create an army of revolutionaries. And this has happened over and over again.
I suppose, do you see that? Because I can definitely see that at points in history that happens. I mean, you read something like Soledad Brother by George Jackson, or you read the writing of the Black Panthers. You read the writing that comes out of the Attica prison uprising. You read Assata Shakur about Love Under the Gun. That's a moment where you really see the sort of strengthening of revolutionary identity and commitment and ideology and work through prison. Is that what's happening here through, Defend Our Juries and JSO and stuff like that? Because I don't mean this in a bad way at all. People I've met who've gone through that process are very committed, very moral people. They've got integrity that I could only dream of. I don't necessarily see them as clear-eyed, hardened revolutionaries, though.
So what we've got to understand is a complex system, right? There's noise and signals, right? So there's loads of noise always, right? In the sense that things go backwards and forwards, and it's always messy, right? But the signal is that matures the movement as a general historical principle, right? And that's one point. The second point is when it happens for the first time, then it's a mess. Because no one's strategically organised for it. There's no infrastructure to bring people out into a pre-existing movement. So what's happened on this iteration with JSO? It's a mess, right? To be blunt, there's people all over the place, not quite sure what they're doing, but that's because it's the first iteration. And if you look at revolutionary struggle, you always have to understand it's a 30-year process or whatever it is, 10-year process, right? In other words, the first time people go into the street and get shot or whatever, it's a mess, right?
Are you sort of saying that your first pancake's always going to suck?
Exactly. So, yeah, that's a good analogy. Absolutely. It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, the first pancake always sucks.
But it's not just me then. But I mean, when I was in prison, I read, a big social scientific study of solidarity, and, it started in 1956, and in 1956, they all went to the street. It was a big mess, there was lots of violence and a lot of machismo, and then they did it in the mid-60s, and the Catholic Church started getting onto the scene a bit, and then it happened in 68 and 72, and, by 74, they were going, okay, so, we need to get organised here. We need to organise for this resistance. We need to connect. This is the strategy I see that we need now, which is we need to we need the connectivities around the system because everyone's experiencing the same thing or starting to experience the same thing. So at the moment, you've ticked the box on the climate, you've ticked the box on Palestine. When Farage gets in, you're going to be ticking the box on the trade unions. Everyone needs to get with the classical program, which is, they came for the socialists and then they came for the and they came for the and then they came for me and there was no one else around. And that's basically the strategic message, the revolutionary climate movement, for want of a better word. People don't use the word climate just for the record. It's about, it's an elite project to destroy humanity, right? The climate's just the mechanism of how to do the destruction this time round. But, leaving that aside, what those people are saying, or what we're saying to the rest of the left space is we need to organise, we need to come together and we need to organise for power. And that's why I'm doing, the whole Your Party, Green Party, assembly thing, which we should come back to.
Yeah, we are definitely going to come back to it. But I am interested in this conversation about culture, though. I'm really interested in this question about political culture, how you build it, how you tend it. And one of the things that you write in Grasping the Enormity of the Moment is two things. One, most groups and projects decline and die when the weird, mad or bad take them over. And then you say, most people are normal in the sense they are not interested in strange habits, wacky ideological theories, and they definitely don't like to be pushed around and abused. I don't necessarily feel that the organisations you've been a part of have always been hotbeds of the normal. There's definitely lots of normal people who get sort of brought in. Certainly, XR was able to sort of cultivate a layer of person which was like retired GP, reverend, sort of like very decent, kind of like Shire dwellers. Do you know what I mean? Like they sort of like had a vibe of that. But there's also been a sense of like, if not, mad and bad and weird, but certainly like a little bit abnormal. Not in a bad way. Everyone who works for Novara is abnormal, including myself.
There's two things to say. I think one of the easy criticisms of XR and JSO is it's all middle-class people. Mm-hmm. Well, has anyone counted them? You know what I mean? I mean, it's a bit like saying that the left is, full of whatever. It's like, it's a projection. It's a trope, right? This is how you put down people that are actually doing some really good work, mm-hmm. is just assume they're all white and middle class. Actually, they're not. Particularly when JSO, because with JSO, that was a conscious mobilisation. With XR, it took off. There was loads of publicity, and so it attracted the existing sort of suspects, as it were, the 300,000 people who are broadly green and liberal, as you might say. With JSO, it's a very different kettle of fish. Not least because it was self-consciously a civil resistance organisation. So a lot of the liberal middle class people didn't join, because, they wouldn't be able to fly to the USA, as they used to say in the meetings, right? That's the usual reason. So what I'm trying to say is, like, by doing 1,000 public meetings and leafleting, the demographics of GSO were a lot more multi-class. There was a lot of working class people, there was a lot of lower middle class people, and there was a lot of middle class people. And that's a function. I'm not saying it's perfect in inverted commas or anything like that, obviously. But what I'm trying to say is, coming back to the other point, is by doing a proactive mobilisation strategy, which uses door knocking, leafleting, assembly-based public meetings, then you're going to. That's a primary mechanism where you break out of your silo culture. So that's one thing. But the other thing I want to mention, which I think you may be getting onto, is about the culture, how people are treated, and this is the big thing. Another big plus of what we've discovered, respectfully putting it to the left, right, is you can't just have people coming into groups and going, "Hi, that's great, come to the next meeting." People need to be proactively inducted into the culture. And, this happens all the time in capitalist companies, right? You don't bring someone in, you tell them about your values, all this sort of stuff, right? Onboarding, right? This is what you have to do. And it doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen well enough, right? So that's something that, there's different ways of doing it, but it's a key part of creating a respectful culture. In other words, you sit down with a person and you say, shouting at people is off, you saying someone's a thing rather than, how to criticise people. If you're late, you apologise, you turn up on time. Like these micro details that basically build a respectful and joyful culture, to be blunt, right? Everyone can enjoy themselves because there's
on
not
the
someone...
left.
So, well, that's what happens in JSO, right? People enjoy it, right? Because the culture's great. I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect, obviously, by any means. But what I came out of XR going, oh my God, it was a shit show, because loads of people came in and it was a mess, right? It didn't have a proper leadership structure and various other things. And with Emancipated Britain and JSO and the A22 things we set up in Europe, and like again, I'm not saying it's the end, it's the final word on the matter, but we substantively created a culture which people enjoyed. And that enabled more people to come in who were normal. And,
this might be because I've had my perceptions of JSO being shaped by, consuming a lot of mainstream media. It also might be the case that my interactions with JSO have sort of been unrepresentative of the wider body of activists. I just don't really... I don't have polling to back this up, but I don't feel like it was a movement of normie activists. I don't feel like it was dominated by normies. I think it was, or at least the people who are most visible to me, were those who were very committed, very bought in, but for various reasons. And I'm not just talking about things like class or race or whatever. I'm just saying sort of in like affect and disposition, atypical of the broader population.
No. Well, there's 2 points, right? There's like normal people, and then there's class makeup, right? So the class makeup was broad. That's my proposition to you. But you're right, they weren't normal people because they were going into civil disobedience at a time when there's not a mass movement of civil disobedience. And this is like a prototypical move, right? I'm not pretending for a minute that JSO is the be-all. Like JSO was always supposed to be a transitional move coming out of COVID. That's how the core strategists saw it and still see it, right? Which is why the whole space has now moved into like the broader community organising, political space, because that's where the battle is going to be done, right? The battle is multi-sector. It's civil disobedience, it's mutual aid, and it's assemblies, elections, right? All those 3 different elements are critical to the large strategy. And if you don't have those, I mean, there's different ways of putting this, right? But for me, like that's quite a neat way of thinking about it, of getting beyond the silo. We just do mutual aid. We do whatever food kitchens in Bradford. Yeah, that's great, but that's not the strategy, right? We sit in a road. Yeah, that's great, but it's not the strategy. We stand in elections. Yeah, it's great. It's not the strategy. The strategy is the connectivity and dynamism of those 3 spaces all coming together, feeding in and out of each other, learning from each other in order to create, healthy cultures, and then building a full frontal attack, in inverted commas, to use that language, on capital in the next 5 years.
I'm sure you'd have your criticisms of Lenin, but I definitely hear some of that Leninist military metaphor in how you frame it.
Well, it has its place, right? It has its place. That's why you don't throw babies out with the bathwater. But it's not a particularly complicated point that, or maybe it is, but maybe this is the main point I want to make, which is we're not going to win without a movement. And there's loads of people saying that, but they don't know what it means and they don't know how to do it, to be blunt. And this brings us onto the main point, I think, which is how are we going to create a connectivity between movement dynamics and election dynamics?
I want to come to that in a second, but I do want to talk about this because it was such a prominent part of Grasping the Enormity of the moment, is that you're a big fan of Sortition. A really big fan of Sortition, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding of it is that you're sort of saying, well, look, if you want your organisation, your movement to reflect the class, you can't just allow sort of self-entitled middle-class people who select themselves for leadership and speaking prominence to take over. So it has to be random, it has to be Sortition. And that's how you get, I think, as you phrased it, Mrs. Jones from the Bolton Council Estate with 3 grandkids into the room and speaking for herself. Sortition's been quite a controversial thing within your party, the idea that it won't be, it'll be 1 member, 1 vote, but you're not going to have delegates as such. You're going to have participation in the conference by sortition, so at random. I suppose I would like to hear from you what you think the benefits of sortition are, and also can you see why there are parts of the left and parts of your party which are very sceptical of sortition when it comes to the founding conference?
Well, I've talked to, on a few occasions on left discussions, debates, right? And I think there's a confusion between this particular context and the principles. So in this particular context, it's problematic for good reasons that the people on the left have said, which is sortition is obviously part of a larger system. And if sortition is used, all these randomly selected people come into a conference, but the people running the conference have not got good motives, as it were, and they want to manipulate people because they're disparate, they're disconnected, at least when they come into the space, and and they don't control the agenda, then obviously it's crap, right? Like, obviously it's crap. But the analogy is the same. You could say the same of democracy. You know, if you go to vote, but there's someone with a gun outside the voting station, then obviously voting's crap. You know, it's a bit of a, you know, it's not a very clever point,
matters.
Right? The point is what is Sortition fundamentally doing? That's what we need to start off with in terms of first principles of what is the agenda of socialism and what is the agenda of Sortition. And Sortition has got a culture problem, in a sort of public relations problem, because it's come out of the nerdy liberal, like, democracy space, right? So people, you know, most Sortition academics, you know, they see this in very technocratic ways. You know, you get the community together and they all come together, you know, and they make sensible decisions. It's rationalistic and cognitive. It's like, no, that's not what's going on here. What's going on is this is the primary mechanism of re-empowering the working class. It has to be central to socialist strategy. And again, Marx didn't say delegates and voting is the way to do it, right? We're free as people on the left to actually go, actually, we were wrong. You know, what they were doing in 1850 is not what we need to do in 2025. We can choose something else. You know, we can give women the vote. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't want it anymore. I don't want it anymore.
You know, I mean, you know, the debates around 1880 to 1900, it's like all these old male socialists go, well, obviously, you know, we want power to the people, but not women. You know what I mean? You know, and in the 1960s, you know, the trade unions in the civil rights movement, it's a bit like, well, we want white workers, but we don't want those blacks. You know, it's like, no, wake up. What's the principle? The principle is every single person is valuable. Everyone needs to have an equal say, and we need a mechanism to enable that to happen. And if empirically it's not happening, then it doesn't matter what your ideology says, it doesn't work. And everyone who looks at it for 5 minutes knows that branch and delegate systems do not work. And the reason they don't work is because of self-selection, you know, iron law of oligarchy dynamics, right? Which have, you know, this was told to the German Socialist Democratic Party, whatever it's called, Social Democratic Party, in 1906, right? So we've known about this problem, and sociologists, you know, they talk about it all the time. So why isn't the left getting with the problem, getting with the program, that is a major problem, right? With the middle class take over the left. Well, how does that happen? It's because middle class left people are confident, they're educated, in inverted commas, and they dominate. And whether they're people of colour or it's a common phenomenon. And the biggest dividing line, we need to get this into our heads, the biggest dividing line in our societies is university-educated people and non-university educated people. This is a massive cultural divide. And it's a political and class divide, of course, as well. So you're not going to defeat fascism by having delegate systems. What you're going to do is just alienate the working class even more, and they're going to vote for reform. What you have to do is go into those working class communities. You've got the listening move, you've got the assembly move, and then you've got, actually, Mrs. Jones, you've got as much chance as, you know, Manchester University lecturer of going to the conference. Fantastic, right? So that's the third step. And then you have to design the fourth step in a good way, which is the conference, right? But it's not beyond, you know, it's not beyond the possibility that you don't have corruption of the process, right? You know, like there's a whole vast literature. People have been doing this for 30, 40 years now. There's a whole academic literature on good practice, just as there's a whole academic literature on how you have a good practice delegate system, right? So it's out there. You know, you have a sortition-based conference committee. It's transparent. You know, everyone can see the minutes. People can see how people have decided, you know, to invite people into the sessions. So you have a plurality of experts. You have a plurality of witnesses to the issue. You have a plurality of interest groups. The Sortition assembly can decide to call its own people. You know, and also don't be so patronising about what ordinary people can do. They're not idiots. You know, there's overwhelming evidence that when you put a sortition assemblies together and you put people in the small groups, if some shit's happening, they'll call it out because people aren't. It's not like people that, you know, it's not like we're all dummies.
No, that's just me.
So you see what I'm saying? I'll tell you something else, which is really important, which should make everyone excited about sortition, right? Is is when you create sortition assemblies, usually it's the middle class people that like it because they've read it in the books, right? And the working class people are going, I'm not sure about this. And then after you've had the sortition assembly, and you say, right, are we going to build a constitution based upon sortition? In other words, are we going to give sortition assemblies real constitutional power? The middle class people go, don't think so. Why? Because it's basically challenging middle class power, right? The power of the administrative class. But the working class people go, actually, that's fucking great.
I suppose,
and they want it.
I suppose like there's one thing, and I don't know if I believe this, but and it's like, sometimes I think this. I sometimes wonder if proponents of sortition, they also really overestimate people's desire to be in big deliberative meetings. I don't want to be in big deliberative meetings. Anytime someone's like, do you want to come to this political conference? My answer is no. I don't want to. I want my evenings with my cat and to watch pro wrestling,
Yeah. Well, that's the whole point, isn't it, right? With Oscar Wilde, socialism, too many meetings, right? So the beauty of this is you get the direct democracy element, which has always been the visionary element to the left, and you get the practicality. Because as we all know, like direct democracy, there's always the problems with it. Well, one of the biggest problems is you have to bloody turn up, right? And you don't want to turn up. I mean, I'm the same, right? 9 o'clock, I'm done, I want to watch whatever, Netflix, right? It's just like, that's number one. Number two is most conferences are boring because they're delegate conferences, because people don't get a chance to meet each other, because they're not designed around sociability. They don't have big breaks. People don't go for walks in the afternoon. You need to design a conference as a party. A party, everyone's enjoying themselves. You have someone playing guitar. There's all these different elements that, need to come into the design. But the fundamental dynamic is if you give ordinary people real power, then they rise to the occasion, which is part of our humanist faith, isn't it? Humans are capable of not being arses, but you have to design it. Otherwise they will be. And you design it by selecting people from the population, putting them in small groups, giving them a plurality of different inputs. And they love it. I mean, you read the literature and it's evangelical. It's evangelical, Like I remember reading something about DC and they had this big one day, citizens' assembly, sortition, blah, blah, blah. Like all these black working class people are coming out and they're going, that's the most important day of my life. And why is that? It's important you understand why this is. Again, because for the majority of the people in Western countries, right, that never get in the public sphere, they never get listened to. And it's like enormous, as I said, it's enormously emotional. People cry in assemblies because they suddenly realise what beauty there is in collectivity. And this is why, it's like, come on, left, this is it. It's exciting. It's not like, we're going to not be able to politically educate people. Like, read some Paulo Freire, for God's sake. It's like, what have you been doing for the last 30 years? It's like, people radicalise through the process of political self-creation. They don't radicalise because the Marxist is telling them about 1917, on a
excuse
Thursday
me, have
night.
you read Yeah.
Yeah, which isn't to say you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Obviously, this debate has been going on. I think with the Russian communists, it was like agitation versus propaganda. Is that right?
I think so.
So the propagandists, going, hello, workers, come to read Marx on Thursday. And they'll go, well, we're not getting very far. And then some of the Jewish socialists in Latvia, we're going, actually, what we're doing is we're starting where people are at. And yeah, it's not that great, but, that's how you mobilise people, which is the Belgian strategy, right, or the GSO strategy. So we know where it works. And there's intrinsic design tension because coming on to your other issue is how do you stop people, doing their false consciousness routine, right? And it's a perennial problem. So there's no final absolute solution to them, but there is doing it well and doing it badly. And obviously telling people to read Marx on Thursday night is not going to do the business, but nor is having big mass assemblies with Farage, riling everyone up. And then Farage goes, everyone put their hand up if they agree with getting rid of migrants. Obviously everyone's going to put their hand up, right? Because of the whole Hitler routine, right? But so between those extremes, what have you got? You need to start evolving sophisticated ways in which people come to sortition assemblies, and they're also given a plurality of information.
Also,
at the same time.
isn't there also a big part of this being relationships? And I think about this a lot, and when I reflect on my own politicization, which is I've been a part of various organizations, I've left various organizations. But the thing that's really glued me to Marxism is the relationships I have within Novara, not just my colleagues, right? People who I've been very close friends with, siblings with for, coming up to 15 years now. A partner who's also very politically committed, friends who are very politically committed, family who are very politically committed. And you've got this thing which is happening all the time, right? And it's happening informally. It's happening when you're, chatting as you're making dinner. It's happening when you're like on your lunch break. It's happening when you're like going for your coffee, where your politics is being fed with plant food every time you're talking to these people. And so I think about this all the time about political organizations and parties is what kind of relationships do they make? Do they make it possible for people to be really friends? They make it possible for people to really rely on each other, to trust each other with their secrets and the times when they feel down, to make it possible to fall in love, because that's the shit which, makes communists and keeps communists, to be honest.
Yes, so that's what I call sociability. When I was writing with my research at King's College, there's two things that basically make the world go round: it's sociability and proximity, right? It's how people treat each other in the micro spaces, and it's about creating micro spaces, i.e. people close to each other. The closer people are to each other, like physically, and emotionally as well, then the more likely you're going to get pro-social behaviour. And at the other extreme, if you want to kill people, then the first step is to separate them. Right? So that's a done deal. So that's what we need to focus on. And I'm totally with you, right? That this is what we need to think about. And I'm saying this as someone that used to be a nerdy bloke. You know what I mean?
Used to be.
Yeah, in the sense that I used to think, oh, you just design this, you just and I'm just moving boxes around, but you're actually moving people's souls around. That's the point, right? And so you need to. So I've learnt the hard way, in inverted commas, that these things are important. This feminized idea of what the human is, and again, you're not throwing the baby out of the bathwater, right? There's good reasons to use a box way of thinking about it. But there's also a dark side of community. And this needs to be understood, particularly by strategists and designers, is community has two sides. It has that love side that, I've worked with this person, I've been to prison with them, I'm with them for the rest of my life, this solidarity, fantastic. And the dark side is, and we're a group and we're not interested in anyone else anymore. Or even worse, we're a group and everyone else is shit. And this happens, with a horrific determinism, right? It's like, and so this is why you need leadership. And this is why you need sortition. You need mechanisms to shake up the space. And the beauty of sortition is you're creating new connectivities. And the horror of self-selection is you reinforce what's called overbonding.
Well, there's something that you write, and I really liked the phrasing of this, which is, to put it bluntly, if you are not sitting around the table with some people you privately think are a bit weird, then you don't have strategic capacity.
Yeah, and that's super obvious. It should be super obvious, at least for the people that are strategizing and designing, is you've got to have plurality. And this is sort of what I was saying to your party, right? I don't want to get all bitchy and all the rest of it, but it's just so tragic that the left sees the other as a threat rather than as an opportunity. And, there was all that goodwill. We had 1,000 people signed up from the climate movement. No one's pretending they're the be-all or end-all. But you bring those people into space, and then you're sitting in this space and someone suggests, you have a go-round, or someone suggests you have a check-in. It's like, what's that? Well, that's a bit weird. It's those hippies. It's like, great, that's how it should be. You know what I mean? Or with the climate people, this person's talking about class in Manchester. Oh, that's a bit weird. We don't really talk about that. Oh, maybe that's interesting. You see, and there was a book about when I was in prison, a book which had this as its central thesis, which was, the farm workers movement in California in the 1960s. I've forgotten what it was called.
Oh, Cesar Chavez.
Yes. So they were amazingly successful, right? And this is the model for the moment. It goes as follows, right? Why were they amazingly successful vis-a-vis, the Teamsters, the traditional unions? Because the traditional unions were one-horse operations. They knew how to do stuff. They had a certain demographic. They had a certain culture, had a certain strategy, and they knew how to do it, and so they failed. You see what I mean? Well, what Chavez was doing and this movement was, they didn't know what they were doing, and so they succeeded because they had the humility to involve a pluralism of different elements. So you had the American-Mexican sort of space, right? Then you had the churches that were supporting them. Then you had the trade union space that was coming in to support them. Then you had the young radicals, white radicals from the city coming to support them. And then you just had the general working class of, rural life. So you had this amazing, slightly headfuck sort of plurality, right? Can you imagine these people sitting around the table, how different their experiences were, but, with intelligent leadership, they created this massive strategic capacity. So when they had a problem, they didn't go, well, we're just going to do the same again. We're going to have a A to B rally in London. It's like, no, that doesn't work, mate. Okay. What you want to do is you want to have a party on the bridges like XR. Oh, right. Okay. Let's have a party on the bridges like, you see what I mean? Oh, so you start expanding your repertoire, which is a massive problem for the left, right? It's like, what do? You do elections and you do rallies, and you watch Novara. You know what I mean? No disrespect.
Hey. The last one's really good.
The last one's good. But it's not a point about whether it's good or bad. It's about the plurality of it, right? Obviously, these things are good in that they're part of the system. And this is the exciting thing that could have been created and has to be created. And obviously, we can talk about where the Green Party's going with this.
That was exactly what I was going to say, is that as we start bringing this home, is that I wanted to ask, do you see that kind of potential with the Green Party under Zack Polanski?
Well, I'd say it's 50-50 as opposed to 70-30 with the left, because the green space is more open. I mean, I had a chat with some Green Party people last week, and I was going, look, you need to use assemblies, you need to engage the community. The community needs to feel like it's engaged. So the fundamental design point here is, does the party choose the candidate? Does the party choose the programme and then go to the people? Or do the people choose the candidate and the people choose the programme? And what I'm trying to say to your party and to Green Party, resting on the shoulders of giants, right? The whole syndicalist tradition is saying, unless the people come first, unless the community comes first, you're not going to defeat fascism. You're not going to mass mobilise, because fascism has a whole load of goodies in its bag, right? And you need to have some goodies in our bag. And deciding what the programme is and the candidate is before you go to the people is fucked. It's just you're not going to do it. I mean, you might do it, obviously you might do it 20%, but in terms of a structural design, it's not going to happen. And this gets to the heart.
But do you think Zack Polanski's thinking in that way?
I don't know, because you won't talk to me. I've written to him twice. But, you can talk to someone else. I'm not saying it's all about me or anything stupid like that. I'm saying, this is a principle which goes back to 1870, right? With Marx versus the anarchists. This point that, do you have a centralised group that has the right knowledge and the right objectivity that goes to the people and tells them what's wrong and they need to get with the programme? Or do you have a bottom-up approach where you say, you tell us what your reality is, and trust that through that process, with loads of little design elements in, right, it needs to be thought about, trust, like the Paulo Freire approach, right, which is, we trust that you're going to come up with something cool. And I've got a particular strategy around this because I'm not naive, right? If you go and do this in Solihull or Essex or something, then you're going to come up with loads of Tory policies. So you don't start it there. What you want to do is start it in Brixton or Chorley or Bolton. And what you will find, without a doubt, is ordinary people are more radical than you, right? They want what you don't need to worry.
I mean, look, the thing is that there's a this isn't coming from a place of worry, but it's sort of something that my housemate, who is a counsellor, said is that, he's been going around trying to organise residents. And one of the things that came up, I can't remember if this was during his campaign or shortly after, was he went to meet with some residents who are like black working class women from an estate. And because obviously he's left coded, right? So he's educated, he's white, standing as a counsellor, it's a very middle class thing to do. And they said to him, like, just don't you fucking dare talk to us about Palestine. Like, don't you dare. And the sort of work that was doing, and like, you don't want to try and, you can over-determine too much from a single anecdote, but I've been trying to make sense of it, is, left-wing people come to us with their programme and they come to us with their set of priorities. And in all sorts of ways, they let us know that we're not that priority. We're not where their heart is. We've got instrumental value to them because their cause is this other thing. And so I suppose I'm not saying that you're going to find that absolutely everywhere, but I'm sort of suggesting that sometimes what we think of, but sometimes there are some really hard challenges to some of our most dearly held principles.
Yes, but so what we need to understand is what's going on there, right? So the first thing to say is obviously we don't ultimately know what's going on, right? But so it's a hypothesis, right? So does the sort of modernist interpretation, which is about the issue, it's about humans or about issues. It's like they don't want to talk about Palestine for reasons A, B, and C, right? And you want to do it for reasons A, B, and C. Like that's the 19th century bollocks, right? That's as far as I'm concerned. That's not what's going on. What's going on is they've felt shat on for like 30, 40 years by the political class. And so whatever you're going to say, they're going to give you a hard time, right? Because they're hurting inside, because they haven't had their most basic human needs fulfilled, which is to be respected and listened to and being able to engage in the creation of collectivity. This is what we need to understand. Humans need to create collectivity. We're social beings, right? This is the whole basis of socialism, isn't it, right? We actually are social beings. So people are systematically like atomized and alienated. Then they get mentally ill, they get aggressive, and they start doing bad things, either to themselves or to their families or to the other, in the community, right? So what's the solution to that? The solution is to shut up, right? Come to the assembly and you talk and we listen. And when you're told that you're a shit, you don't go, well, you say, okay, so you don't like me. Tell me more. Right? This is just standard therapy, isn't it? Right? It's discovered by Carl Rogers like 50, 60 years ago. Shut up and listen. And then, not all the time, but most of the time, and after a little while, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 2 years, people will go, actually, you're okay. Why are you okay? Not because of your views.
But because you listened.
Because you listened. Because the connectivity comes before the rationality. So it's not like these, I could be wrong, right? But my take on it is that what these people are saying is they don't not want to, they are obviously like fucked off about Palestine. But something's trumping that, which is all these people keep coming in and telling us what to do and doing this pseudo I'm in solidarity with you routine and right? So that mending with the working class is going to take it's going to take a while because you messed it up for like 30 years, to be blunt, right? So again, I'm not giving anyone a hard time. I'm just trying to be like positive about it, right? It's exciting because hopefully the left is now, more open, like with Sortition, like with assemblies, like listening on the doorstep. All these all these designs are coming in, which is exciting, which is what happened in California in the 1960s with the Mexican Americans, right? You've got all these different wisdoms and different cultures coming together, and that's what we're supposed to be about, isn't it?
Well, I'm going to leave it on this exciting note. I know you've got limited patience with talking for talking's sake, so why are you here? What is it you want people to do?
Well, yeah, talking in and of itself is going to get us nowhere, and it's really, really important that we understand that clearly. And what that concretely means is when there's these conversations like we've just had, there needs to be a pathway to action. This is how you build a movement. So this whole conversation we just had can't be seen as something separate from the movement. It has to be embedded within this growing movement in all its plurality. So what I want to suggest is that there's a Zoom call, in a week or two, and hopefully there's going to be a link about it. And I will be there. I'll do some speaking about it. People can ask questions, and then there will be a bunch of different pathways through which people can get involved, whether that's, your party, Green Party, Assemble. There's a whole bunch of different organisations that are coming together. And that's the exciting point of this conversation, isn't it? We're not talking about abstraction here. We've got a crisis, and we need to be bringing people in, and people will choose which bit of the movement they want to go into. But we need to provide that opportunity for people.
I feel like, that episode of The Simpsons when he's saying, I was saying boo words. It's like, I was excited about abstraction. Thank you very much, Roger, for joining us on Downstream.
Thanks.